Hey, friends! Just so you know, we enjoy the swear word and we rely on good old fashioned humor to get through some seriously dark subject matter. At no time do we intend any disrespect toward the victims or families of the victims in the cases we cover. Also, be sure to listen to the end for a few palate cleansing bloopers to reset your mindset. And with that, we thank you for listening and we hope you enjoy. Hey, friends! Welcome to Crime Will Tell. I'm Carrie.
And I'm Jamie.
How's it going?
It's all right. How are
Yeah.
you?
I just had the laziest weekend. I wasn't feeling motivated to do anything.
That's okay. That's what weekends are for.
Yeah, this happens to me around this time of year because I'm a summer girl. And so this winter shit and the cold and the snow and the gloomy
Mhm.
days and like it just, I'm over it. So I
Yeah.
start to get a bit melancholy. But today's case is hard for me to understand and like get my mind wrapped around it. This case is local to the Fox Valley area of Northeast Wisconsin, which is the area that we live
Mhm.
in. So usually Fox Valley, I don't know, some people say it's from certain to certain, but I think it's from like Fond du Lac to Green Bay. So if
Right.
you're looking
Okay.
at a map, that whole area that spans the distance between Fond du Lac and Green Bay, that's the area that our case is in.
Oh, okay. So it's a
Um,
local one. All right.
it's a local one, yeah. John Last, who was a science teacher at Winneconne Middle School, decided one day to kill his wife and then to take his own life.
Oh, okay.
So we'll be discussing suicide today. If that's a bit much to handle, we understand. We'll see you at the next episode. So just making a warning out there for everybody.
Yeah.
So obviously we need some bourbon to get us through
Mhm.
this. So what are you drinking today?
I switched it up a little bit, and I'm actually drinking a bourbon cream.
What is
This
a bourbon
was
cream?
this one is from Buffalo Trace. It's like Bailey's,
Ooh, I
kind of,
like Buffalo Trace.
but it's with
Oh,
bourbon.
oh,
Yeah, so it's a bourbon cream
oh, I thought you were
on ice.
drinking milk.
No,
Because it
no.
looks like milk.
It sure does, but it's the only milk I drink is when it's made with
Bourbon
bourbon.
cream.
Yes,
Ooh, I
exactly.
want to try that.
Yeah, it's pretty tasty.
So, brother introduced me to a new bourbon
Mm.
called Heaven Hill. It says bottled in bond under US government supervision. I don't know what that means. I have to do
Yeah.
some research, but it's Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey. It's very good. So,
Okay.
well,
Well, I'm gonna try
cheers, my
that.
friend. Yes.
Cheers to you. Clink.
Clink. Mm.
Mm, mm, mm.
Oh, my lordy, lordy, that is spicy. Holy moly.
Mine is smooth because it's creamy.
um, Unfortunately, this will be a bit of a shorter episode than usual, but there is very little on this case. There's very little on this case, and it's pretty cut and dry. Like,
Okay.
he did it. It's not a whodunit, but what's interesting is that I did not know about this case, but my husband, Sean, shared this case with me
Okay.
because John Last happened to be Sean's middle school science teacher.
Oh shit.
Yeah. And Sean's like, I can't remember if I had him when I was in sixth grade or seventh grade, but I know it wasn't eighth grade. So it was sixth or seventh grade.
Whoa. So when is this case from? I know you'll get into it, but
This case occurred on November 22nd, 2002. So
okay.
Sean, I'll get into it
Okay.
because
Gotcha.
Sean wasn't in middle school in 2002.
Thank
But
God.
yeah, one day, I mean, like we were sitting on the couch and he's like, hey, did I ever tell you about my middle school science teacher that like murdered his wife and then killed himself? And I'm like, nope, I would have remembered that.
Yeah.
I'm
You sure
like,
didn't.
so dish and tell me everything. He's like, well, this happened back in the early 2000s, whatever. Anyway, so like I said, this occurred on November 22nd, 2002, right before Thanksgiving. Not a really, I mean, is there really ever a good time to kill someone and then take your own life?
No, there isn't. Mm-mm.
I suppose if there is an unrelenting apocalypse, if the
Yeah,
sun's about to explode, if an asteroid is imminently about to make the Earth
right.
disappear,
Okay,
I
fair
suppose those
point.
would be good times, I suppose.
There's a couple
I
times, yeah.
silver lining. I'm trying to find the silver lining. So, 2002, Sean was already out of college at that time.
Okay,
So, he was a middle schooler in the early to mid 90s.
gotcha.
So, this happened a few years after he graduated high school and was
Right.
out of college. But he was no less shocked when
Well,
he
yeah.
found out about this, as was the entire community, because where this took place was in a little township called Winneconne, which is by the Neenah area, but not really. So it's kind of out in the boondocks, if you will. It's a little bit more rural and not a lot of people. John Last taught at Winneconne Middle School, and that's the middle school that Sean went to when he took his science class by Mr. Last.
Okay.
So you can imagine when shit hit the fan, the entire community was like, "Holy shit!" Because this was a teacher.
Right.
This guy had students, and he was beloved.
Mm, wow.
And you'll see why there was a lot of shock in the community because he was very known for being just absolutely head over heels for his wife.
Whoa. Okay.
And like I
Interesting.
said, as with most small town murders that aren't widely covered, there is very little public information available. And the handful of newspaper articles that are out there were published around the time of the incident and basically regurgitated the same information. So,
Yeah, those get tricky when there's not a trial that's being covered. Maybe somebody on the loose, on the run for a while that cops are looking for, that kind of generate even more coverage and more articles when it's just like, yep, this happened. And then there's nothing else to follow up on. It's like fucking
yeah,
crickets.
because it was basically open and close. Like there
Yeah.
was no trial, there was no who done it, there was no investigation. Well, there was a tiny investigation, but it was like a bloop on the radar
Mm,
because it was very apparent what happened.
okay.
But this whole situation did cause quite a bit of community trauma, as one could imagine. We did cover Cora Jones. She lived in Wapaka. Wapaka is another small community within the Fox Valley, Northeast Wisconsin area that caused a lot of community trauma. Basically, you have a lot of these small town incidences that even, decades later, people that still live there that were there at the time are talking about it. Like it
Hmm.
doesn't ever go away. It becomes
Yeah.
part of the community fabric, if you will.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
So when Sean had John Last as a teacher, he remembered that Mr. Last talked a lot about how much he loved his wife, Debra, and their three children. So they had three children, all boys, but he regularly shared anecdotes about Deborah and his boys, their family life, and he had no reservations about giving his students a glimpse into his life as a regular human being, which is kind of cool because I remember going through school. I don't know about you, James, but I felt like most of my teachers were enigmas and
Hmm.
like they didn't have a life. They just magically appeared. They taught.
You'd see him at the grocery store and you're like, what the fuck?
Yeah. Where are you eating? You don't eat. You're just a robot that teaches. But he had no problems sharing glimpses of his life. By all accounts, he seemed like and was viewed as like a devoted husband, a devoted father. And Sean said that he developed the impression that they were a happy, fun, stable, normal family, which at the time they probably were. Now, members of both John and Deborah's families, as well as their three boys, still live in this community.
Oh, shit.
Yeah, which isn't too far from where we live, as I mentioned, out in Winneconne. So, in deference to and respect for their privacy, I'm not going to share the boys' names. They are all grown adults, but I just want to be respectful of the fact that a lot of people that were very close to this still live in the community, but it is not a secret of what happened.
Right. Okay.
So when a little bit about Mr. Last as a teacher. So when Sean was in middle school, he struggled pretty hard with ADD, attention deficit disorder. And a lot of his teachers would get frustrated with him instead of trying to understand how he learns best because he had a hard time focusing and he would just get in trouble with these other teachers, but not Mr. Last. Mr. Last saw my husband for who he really was, a good kid that had trouble focusing. And instead of getting upset and frustrated and labeling him like a distraction to those around him, do you remember those little like talks too much in class that you get on your
Mhm.
report cards?
Yeah.
Distraction to those around, or a clown that didn't care, or, likes to fool around and doesn't care. And then treating him like many of his other teachers did. Mr. Last actually worked really hard to meet Sean where he could so he could get the most out of his class. Sean to this day was like, that's one of my favorite classes I ever had. He was one of my favorite
Oh,
teachers because he
that's
actually took the
awesome.
time to get to know how Sean needed to be taught, which I think is a really important skill for teachers to have and like that they
Absolutely.
care.
Yeah.
Anyway, he
Agreed.
would regularly tell Sean, he being Mr. Last, that he was a great kid and he should be proud of himself and keep working hard. Like these were the things, these were the messages that Mr. Last told Sean when Sean had him as a teacher. So if he was doing that with Sean, he was probably doing that with a lot of other students too.
Yeah.
And even all these years later, I can see how those words from that one science teacher, Mr. Last, like made Sean feel seen. So that's just, I mean, we're pretty lucky that we have like an inside, you know, someone that knew Mr. Lass as a teacher in the classroom and kind of like how he could make his students feel.
Yeah.
Mr. Last, John, he was described as eccentric. Like he was an eccentric teacher. Personally, my favorite teachers are eccentric teachers.
Exactly.
He
Yeah.
was one of those teachers that did not follow normal teacher conventions or went strictly by the book. He had the gift of making science seem really fun. So his students wanted to be in his class. They couldn't
Nice.
wait to take science with Mr. Last. In an article published in the Sheboygan Press, residents of the community who knew John as a teacher said, quote, he was an affable teacher, liked by students for his efforts to get them interested in science through hands-on learning. That's a nice thing to say.
Yeah,
In another
absolutely.
article published in the Green Bay Press Gazette, a high school student said, quote, he was a fun teacher. Just about everyone loved going to his class. Sean said that Mr. Last would stand in the hallway in between classes and tell students they were rock stars or give them high fives or basically just
Aw.
make you feel like you had value, that you were seen. Like he'd be standing out in the class in the hallway and like Sean would walk by and he'd be like, hey, O'Brien, how's it going? Doing good today? Or something like that. Isn't that special? Like that
Yeah, I think
would make me
so.
feel special. But there is a murder
Yeah.
and there is a suicide.
Mhm.
So often we hear that things can be very, very different behind closed doors. And I think when you have the type of personality Mr. Last had in public, and this type of personality that makes people gravitate to you, realizing that behind closed doors, that vibe could be very different. It's hard to believe that. It's hard to reconcile that with the person that you see and know.
Mhm.
But humans are so multifaceted. I mean, Facebook, Insta, it's so easy to give off the vibe or the view that you want the public to see.
Right.
And I think that was a big part of what was going on with Mr. Last. Maybe he was the original manifester. If I say this enough, it'll be true. I don't know. I feel like humans are like tiny balls of energy with multiple dimensions and identities roaming around this ball that's hurtling through space around the sun at an ungodly speed. To get super philosophical about it, we have so much going on, every single one of us. Like, I'm a sister, a daughter, a wife, a mother, a friend, a cat mom, a fake dog mom. Hey, Olive. Runner, storyteller, corporate world worker, tastiness drinker, whatever. I'm all of these things, but not all at one time. And I think Mr. Last was the same way. And I think he came with a lot of flaws, just like you, just like me,
Just
just like
everybody.
anyone.
Yeah.
So, depending on the situations we find ourselves in at any given time, over any given time period, depending on how long the situation occurs, we'll figure out which identity and dimension works best for us and lean into that. We all do this.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
So, dysfunction, I think, is really normal or standard, if you will.
Hmm.
And we're all dysfunctional, in my opinion, in some way, shape, or form. And what I described just now is wholesome, stable dysfunction. It's perfectly imperfect, it's being human. But when you throw in long term emotional abuse or any number of unhealthy or toxic dysfunctions of trauma, especially over a long period of time, it can lead to making some pretty horrible decisions that permanently change lives, that push out a ripple effect that is felt far and wide and forever. Because even now in 2025, 23 years later, we're talking about this.
Right. Yeah.
It's still felt in the community. 3 boys still don't have their parents anymore.
Right.
The boys are the worst victims out of all of this. And this is what happened with Mr. Last. And while he loved his wife, Deborah, I am certain he loved her. And while he loved his 3 boys, there was what we learned later long term emotional abuse going on in that relationship. One of Deborah's longtime friends since grade school was quoted in an Oshkosh Northwestern article as saying, quote, "Truly, he was a nice guy because of his high profile. I always felt that people never believed Deborah. She had just kind of given up."
Hmm.
What you won't see published in the newspaper articles is the reason why Mr. Last killed his wife, Deborah, and then took his own life. According to a 2002 Wisconsin domestic violence homicide report, the impetus was that John had thought Deborah was having an affair and accused her of such.
Uh,
So, like, he confronted her. He was like, "Hey, I think you're having an affair. Who are you fucking? Blah, 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 blah." She worked as a pharmacist at the local pharmacy, and the rumor was she was having an affair with a coworker.
mm,
That was the rumor. John heard about it. After John's accusation, Deborah actually moved out of their home and lived with a friend for the summer. So the
okay.
summer of 2020, nope, 2002, she had moved out of their house and lived with the friend for the summer because John wasn't working. He was going to be home. He was out
Right.
of school for the summer, blah, blah, blah. But at some point before, obviously, November of 2002, she had moved back into their marital home.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if they made up or decided to try to work it out. I'm not
Yeah.
sure, but she did move back in. According
Hmm.
to that domestic violence homicide report, shortly before the incident in November, John had, quote, made statements to different people that he might be kicked out of his house or that he was separating from his wife. So we're starting to see an escalation. And we're starting to hear not everything is super rosy in the last household.
Yeah. And it may have been a situation that they both knew it was going to end, but she was like, I got to get my ass back in that house because I want to keep the house. You know what I mean?
That's fair. That's actually a really good point, James, because if you leave voluntarily, that can be used against you. The widely accepted reason for what John did was that he couldn't bear to live without his wife. He just wasn't going to be able to handle a divorce. So he took them both.
Mm,
Kind of like the whole if I can't have you, no one can.
right. Yeah.
At the
Damn.
time of their deaths, John was 54 and Deborah was 49. They had been married for 24 years.
Shit.
Whatever John's thought process, it did lead him to make a, an irreversible decision on Friday evening, November 22nd, 2002. Deborah was lying in bed. It is unclear if she was sleeping when John shot her 4 times at close range with a rifle.
Fuck.
Yeah, she was kind of obliterated.
Ugh.
The next morning, in the early hours, John called his brother for help, explaining that he had shot Deborah and was going to kill himself. I don't necessarily think this was a call for help. I don't think he had any intention of roping his brother in to help him and stop him. I think my personal opinion for that phone call to his brother was to admit what he had done to clear his conscience before he took his own life. That's why I think he called his brother. His brother was like, "What the fuck?" And
Yeah.
like raced to John's house and arrived just in time to hear the gunshot that took John's life.
Oh, shit.
Now, what I don't know is, did John know that his brother was going to rush over and he waited until he saw his car pull up and then he took his life
Mm,
because he didn't want both of their bodies to be found by their boys? Was he trying to protect his boys? I don't know.
yeah.
But John's brother rushed inside. He found Deborah and John's bodies. He called the police. So that's how the
Mm,
police found out what
gotcha.
had happened.
He may have also done it because he didn't want to be talked out of it.
That's
Like,
possible.
he may have just was like, "This is what needs to happen. I'm not gonna be able to live with myself after killing her, and my brother's gonna try and talk me down and make a different decision." So he might have
Yep.
seen him pull up and
Was like, shit, now I have to.
yeah,
Or maybe he was chickening out
maybe.
and calling his brother, knowing his brother was going to rush over was his way of going like, now I have to do this.
Yeah. Yeah,
I don't know.
maybe.
Anyway, so he called the police got there. That's when John's brother learned that John and Deborah's youngest son, who was an adult but still living at home. So all three boys were adults at this time. None of them were still in high school. They were all, 18. But
Okay.
their youngest son was home sleeping. And the gunshot that took John's life is what woke him up.
Whoa, not the 4 from
Police believe he was not
uh,
home that evening,
oh, gotcha,
the
gotcha.
evening before when John killed
Damn.
Deborah, and had no idea that when he came home later that night that his mother was dead in the house. He had no
Oh,
idea.
shit.
Because again, Deborah was in her bed,
Yeah.
in
Oh
their
my
bedroom.
god.
Oftentimes, when mom and dad are in bed, the door's closed or
Mhm.
whatever. So the youngest son had no idea. And it wasn't until the morning hours. So basically, if you think about the picture of this, John shot Deborah 4 times at point blank range with a rifle. That's going to cause horrible damage. And
Yeah.
then stayed with her body all night until the next morning when he called his brother, told his brother, confessed what he had done, and then shot himself. And maybe because he knew his son was home, maybe that's why he called his brother. I don't
Yeah.
know. I tend to think that he wanted his brother to handle the situation and not be left to his youngest son to handle the situation.
Right. And then his son would have his uncle there as support.
Hmm.
Oh my god.
John and Deborah had a joint funeral and were laid to rest side by side. I see the look on your face.
Oh,
So Sean,
yeah.
I read this in the source material, and I asked Sean, I was like, "Hey, so how did was there anything in the community about them being laid side by side for eternal rest and having a joint funeral?" Like, and he was like, "Oh yeah, the family was truly divided. Deborah's family was fucking horrified that
Yeah.
John took her away from them. They didn't want her funeral and resting place to have anything to do with John,
Yeah.
even
And
though they had
rightfully
been married for
so.
20. Yeah.
Whew.
But the boys, their three boys, they loved their parents and they wanted them to have a joint funeral and to be laid to rest together.
Mm.
So
That's
when you
such
look
a
at their
tough
burial,
situation. Ugh.
such a tough, I mean, they had a joint funeral and they were laid to rest side by side. So the family, I have a lot of respect for Deborah's family, because John's family is probably like, fuck, like we don't really have anything like we have no say in any of this
Mhm.
because our family member did this. But Deborah's family, I give them a lot of respect and credit. The boys wanted a joint funeral. They wanted their parents to be laid to rest side by side. They wanted to remember their parents as a unit. And Deborah's family went along with it because that was what the boys wanted.
Hmm.
That was what was best for the boys
Do
for
you
their
know
grief.
if they had plots already? Like, as a couple, if they already had their plots purchased?
There was nothing specific about that, but I got the impression no.
Okay, that makes sense, but I was just curious if it was like, "Well, fuck, they already have them, so."
Oh, and they're like estate planning.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
whatever, just like it
Possibly.
would probably be more of like our parents or grandparents' generations that did that, but a lot of times you'd get married and then you'd buy your cemetery plots side by side. They were just there for decades.
That's a good point. Again, nothing like that was mentioned in the source material. When you look at their burial plaque and read their obits, they were laid to rest together after a joint funeral. I can see both sides, like I said. I can
Yeah.
see both sides. Because at the end of the day, who are the people that are going to visit the burial sites the most often and for the longest period of time? It's going to be their boys.
And they might not have ever seen the bad part of their parents' relationship. It might have been painted as rosy as could be. I mean, obviously, their mom had moved out for a few months, but they might not have seen just kind of the magnitude that it was. And two of them weren't even living at home at the time. So they might have been pretty oblivious to what that dynamic between their parents was actually like prior to that.
It's interesting that you bring that up because I literally have this next part of
Oh, sorry.
what I wrote. No, don't be sorry. It's awesome because it was a great segue. I wrote, I think about my own parents who have been married for decades, right? And they've been a great example of what a loving, stable marriage looks like. And that's not to say everything is unicorns, poop, and jelly beans all the time. They quarrel, they get annoyed with each other, frustrated, all the things, but it's the grace with which you deal with the yuckiness, right? They've shown what it looks like to really respect each other and be committed to their commitment. And I wonder, just like what you just said, if this is what John and Deborah's boys saw for the most part, a healthy, loving, stable marriage. They quarrel, they argue, they get annoyed with each other and pissed off, but they work through it because they were married for 24 years. And if it was how they saw their parents and how they saw their marriage and what their parents let them see, how can they possibly process this? Even in a million lifetimes, how could they possibly process their father annihilating their mother with a rifle and then taking his own life? And also the youngest son being home when this happened. John had to have known he was there.
Yeah, you would think.
That is a trauma that his two older brothers don't have, on top of the trauma of losing both of your parents at the same time, suddenly, in such a shocking way.
Right.
And this is why this case, I struggle with it because I have a hard time wrapping my mind around how can you be with someone? They were married for 24 years. They probably dated for a few years before that. They were together for more than 2.5 decades. That's such a long time. Was there ever violence before? I didn't see anything like that. I saw emotional abuse. You know what I mean? Like what nowadays we call gaslighting or not being
Yeah.
very careful with feelings or whatever. But to have physical violence like that where it could threaten your life, like how do you I can't wrap my mind around how you can be with somebody for that long and this happens. And then do you truly really ever know someone?
Yeah.
I mean, think about your wife, think about my husband. Like I would say, like we would both say, like we know them like the back of our hands and they would do this or they would never do that or whatever. But do we truly know? I don't, that makes me uncomfortable.
Yeah. Like, would he have been viewed as less of a villain to her family if he had immediately called 911, knowing that she probably was deceased, but like called and was like, oh my God, I just fucking shot my wife. I need help, whatever, instead of just staying with her body for hours and do you know what I mean? Like if he would have acted and like had immediate regret and made some sort of effort to try and get her help or not risk their son walking into the bedroom and seeing his mom dead, it just put kind of a whole different level on it that he was just kind of tooting around their house all night, contemplating suicide, but not actively trying to make amends or do the right thing and alerting authorities, getting his brother there sooner, whatever it might have been. I don't know. It just kind of puts a different
Yeah.
spin on it to me.
That's why I keep going back to I think he intentionally killed her when their youngest was gone so he wouldn't know. And then couldn't kill himself because then when their son came home, he would know something was wrong and he'd go snooping around and find them. And he didn't want,
Yeah, so maybe he had to wait till his
he
brother
had to.
was awake the
Yeah.
next morning to
Yeah.
possibly get there.
Although
Yeah, that makes sense.
he could have called his brother that night while his son was out and did the same thing and then killed
Yeah,
himself. And then his son would have been out of the house and wouldn't have heard, like the gunshot wouldn't have woken him up. So I don't know. Because both people involved in the relationship are no longer here, no one can talk about the whys and the real motivation behind what led to this. But the general accepted theory is that she betrayed him by having an affair. Whether she truly did or not is truly, I don't know. It's not clear in the sources. And maybe he just felt so betrayed and he's like, I married you till death do we part. I can't live without you. I don't know.
yeah,
Anyway, incredibly tragic. I hope all three boys, which are well into their late 40s, early 50s at this point, have been able to live really good lives.
yeah. I hope so too.
So that's the
Damn.
tragic case of John Last and Deborah Last.
Hmm.
Yeah. So thanks for listening to that. Kind of shorter because, like I said, very little information. There's just like, there's a few sources on this, and the rest is folklore, really.
Man.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
So,
just like I wish we knew more about what happened in those hours leading up to the shooting
uh huh.
and what he was doing
Uh huh.
that night after he shot her.
I want to know if he greeted his son when his son came home.
Mm. Or if he just like hid in the bedroom and just was like,
Yeah.
he'll think we're asleep, like just be quiet.
Yeah. I want to know, like, what happened there.
Yeah.
Uh,
Damn. That's sad.
well, thank you for listening. As always, we appreciate you.
Yeah.
Go ahead and hit that subscribe button, rate, review, tell your friends.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Subscribe to our channel on YouTube. We're now on Blue Sky. Yeah, Facebook, Instagram, all that good stuff. But we really appreciate you guys listening and
Yeah.
sharing the podcast with other people, other true crime fans, and just getting the word out.
Yeah. Well, on that note, goodbye, Jamie.
Goodbye, Carrie. Were they watching TGIF? Like, what the fuck were they doing?
Who gives a shit?
I got a case for you.
Thank you for remembering.
I should probably be drinking.
You know what? I'm not going to.
Oh, no.
See, I can't land a joke.
What the fuck is what?
You fuckers.
Yay.
La 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 la.
Cool.